So I've got a piece of rock maple here. I've just sanded that nice and flat, and this is going to be our test piece for figuring out the vintage stain that we're going to apply to this neck. Now the first thing I want to do with maple is just wipe it down with a damp cloth. You don't want too much moisture on there, but you want to raise the grain. We'll come back and we can sand any of that fuzz off once it's dry. Now I've given that 10 minutes to dry and I can feel a lot of raised grain on there. You'll feel a fuzz when you rub your hand over the board. Now we need to knock all of that grain off, and I'm just using a new sheet of sandpaper here. It's 400 grit, but it doesn't really matter. We just want to take all of that roughness off the board. Okay, that's feeling nice and smooth now. On our maple neck, we are going to apply a stain by hand. We're going to give it a vintage style amber colour before we apply some true oil. Now this neck will be finished totally by hand. There will be no spraying any lacquer or anything like this, so it's a good example of what you can do when you don't have any of the fancy spray gear. But before we can commit to wiping a stain on there, we need to test it on some scrap so we can gauge the colour. So we've got a couple of different stains here. We've got vintage amber and we've got tobacco brown. Now these can be dissolved in alcohol or water. In my instance, I'm using lacquer thinner. I've just got a little jar of it here. We're going to mix a ratio of that into here, and we're going to tint it to the colour that we need, and then we're going to wipe it onto our test piece of scrap and see how the colour looks. Now the majority of this colour is going to come from the vintage amber. So we've got a fair amount of colour in that, I can see. I'm just going to put a couple of drops of tobacco brown in as well. Just 2 drops. It's looking fairly dark. If I've actually mixed that too dark, what I will do is tip some of it out and thin it out with some more lacquer thinner. We'll test our colour out and see how it looks. That's looking pretty good. Alright, so now I'm happy with the colour. I'm just going to wipe over the neck with a damp cloth. We're going to raise the grain on the maple. Alright, so we'll let this sit for 15 minutes or so and then we can sand it back. So I've let that dry and I can feel the roughness. I'm just going to use a very fine sanding sponge. Just work my way around the neck. This is very fine, it's probably about 600 grit. So it's not really sanding any maple, it's just removing the fuzz that we've lifted up when we wet it down with some water. And for getting in between the frets, I've just got those little rubber sanding blocks. You could use a pencil eraser, and I've just got some 600 grit sandpaper, and that makes quick work of just removing the raised grain in those little confined areas. And then I have an even smaller block for getting into these smaller frets. So this has been outside and I've blown all of the dust off it, and we're now ready to put some stain on here. I've also put just an old towel down so I don't make a mess. Just take our stain mix. just wipe it onto our neck. Pretty simple. Make sure you get all of the corners. Just try to get right in up to the frets and fill that with colour as well. Flip it over and we can apply our stain to the back of the neck as well. Have a quick check around the neck. Just make sure there are no areas that you've missed. This dries almost straight away, so that's why I'm not terribly concerned about it contacting the towel. So that's come out really nice. That's the colour depth I'm after, and we've ended up with a really nice vintage amber looking colour. So that's pretty much touch dry as it is, but I'll leave that overnight. In the morning we can come in and we can rub some True Oil all over this neck. So our colour mix ended up being about 8 or 9 drops of vintage amber and 2 drops of tobacco brown. That gave us this colour we have here. So we're ready to put some True Oil on this neck now. So I've got my True Oil, just going to shake it up. We're going to wipe on a very thin coat, front and back. I've just made up a very simple stand to hold the neck in place. That should allow me to wipe this True Oil on without too many dramas. So I'm just wiping on a very thin coat. It's very easy to apply this stuff, and it will build up a film after a while and it will get shinier. Just make sure I remove the excess off the fretboard. I don't want it pooling in by the frets. Just make sure we take a bit of time to give it a really good wipe and make sure there's no puddles of the stuff. Does a nice job of popping the grain on this bird's eye maple as well, which is nice to see. And that amber mix we put on there has given it a lovely colour. I'm very pleased with that. Now I think the trick here is put on less than you think you need. You can always wipe multiple coats on here. You just don't want it on too thick. If you put it on too thick, it'll be sticky, it'll take a long time to dry, and it won't look good. The idea is we're going to steel wool this finish. After we've built up a little bit of film, we'll get 4 or 5 coats on, I think, and then we'll take to it with some very fine steel wool and we'll just knock everything back. We'll take it back to a dull sheen and then we'll start with some more coats. So that's looking pretty good. I've got a coat over the fretboard and the top of the headstock. Now I can grab it underneath where it's not got any oil on it, and we can thread that into the truss rod on that end, and this just sits down like that. And now we can just come back with some oil on the back here. Make sure we don't miss any spots. There's a slight ambering effect that we get from the True Oil as well. So over multiple coats, this neck will darken up just a little bit more. Just wiping it with the grain, just trying not to leave any little marks on there. It's hard to do actually. There will be marks, but that's what the steel wool takes care of later. Okay, so I'm happy with that. We've got our first coat on the neck. That's going to be one of many coats. We'll probably do 2 or 3 coats a day and just make sure it's well and truly dry before we go on to the next coat. And I just put the rag into just a little sealy bag, just get all the air out of it, and then we can use that again for the next coat. So that's looking nice. We've got a little bit of a shine. That's going to get sucked into the wood and we'll get a patchy finish by the time it's dry, but that's okay because that's why we come back with multiple coats, just to build up a little bit of finish. So we've now got 4 coats rubbed into this neck and we're starting to develop a little bit of a shine on there. At this point you'll notice that you've got white marks and it's not absolutely perfect looking. So we can take care of that at this point, and we're going to rub it back with some super fine steel wool. It's just simply a matter of pulling some of that off, rolling it into a ball, and now we can just lightly work this surface back to a dull finish. So it doesn't take a lot of work and it just prepares the surface to accept some more coats of oil. So you don't need to rub it for long. All we're doing is just looking to just smooth everything out, and that feels great right now, and just dull it up to an even consistency. We'll just work our way all around the neck here. Don't forget to do the sides as well. Go all around the edges. And this steel wool obviously is virtually like a piece of very fine sandpaper. So it conforms around the edges as we rub this back, and it just it makes it very easy to do. So we've got this cleaned up now. I've taken it outside. I've just cleaned all the mess off it. You do get a lot of powder and whatnot come off the steel wool as you're using it, so you need to clean all that away. Turn the towel over and then just take another look. Make sure there are no shiny spots left on there. As it is now, the neck feels really nice. So you've got a couple of options you can do at this point. You can just take a cloth and you can just buff it by hand. You just keep rubbing that, build a bit of heat up, and you will actually get a satin finish on that. You can just keep rubbing that until you get a finish that you're happy with, or you can put some more coats on, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to put another 4 coats on, and then we're going to repeat the procedure of knocking it back with a steel wool. Once we've done that, we're going to buff it out just by hand, just with a cloth, and then we're going to apply a wax to it. So I'll move ahead and I'll apply another 4 coats over the next couple of days, and then we'll catch up after that. So we're back with our neck, and I've since applied another 4 coats of True Oil, and I've just rubbed it back with the steel wool as we did previously. So we've got 8 coats on there, and now I've rubbed it back with the steel wool. At this point we can take a old t-shirt and we can just start buffing this to a shine. Now you're not going to get a full gloss shine, but what you're going to get is a nice satin finish. You want to rub that pretty hard and generate a little bit of heat, a little bit of friction, and just polish that up nicely. You can see that starting to shine already. Now it might take you a good 5 or 10 minutes to buff this neck up. Just work around all of the edges, make sure you catch everything. Now it's important to get in between those frets and buff right up to the edges of the fret wire, just so we've got a nice uniform sheen across the whole width of the fret here. So I've just spent the last 20 minutes or so just buffing in between those frets and just getting right up to the fret edges and giving that a really good rub, and we've just got a lovely sheen all over this neck now, and you could quite rightfully just call that finished. I mean, it feels amazing. I cannot wait to bolt that on and play it. What I usually do though is, after applying True Oil and buffing it out, I like to come back with a wax, gunstock wax, and this is the same brand, which is Birchwood Casey, same brand as a True Oil, and I would like to just rub a thin film of wax all over here and buff it out, and then we'll call that finished. And I just like to rub a thin film, just as we did with the True Oil. Just wipe that on there, just keep moving it about until we get it dry. Once it starts to dry, we just buff it until we get a nice smooth sheen. Change the cloth out, come back with my larger cloth, and I can feel how smooth that is under the cloth. It just feels wonderful. That's it. That's our headstock done. Flip it over and we can just repeat the process on the back. We'll go around the sides this time. Just make sure we cover everything. So this has now been waxed and buffed out, and it is finished. It's beautiful. Very, very slick and smooth neck, and very simple to do. So in terms of woodworking and applying a finish, this neck is 100% complete. We do need to level the frets, which we will do later when we set the guitar up, but in terms of woodworking and finish, we're done. We can put this to the side and we can start thinking about applying finish to the body. And the first thing we're going to do is to wipe the body down with a wet cloth. We're just going to raise the grain on our mahogany body, and then we're going to sand that back, and then we are ready to start finishing. Now we do need to raise the grain on our body. If you don't do this step now, you will have the grain rise when you're applying the finish, and that's the time where you don't want to have to be sanding the body, certainly not straight away. You would normally raise the grain now and get rid of all of those little rough furry bits, and then you don't have to deal with them later. Now, although it looks like the body's quite wet, it's only on the very surface. This cloth does not have much water on it. So I've let that dry and I can feel the wood fibres standing up, so we can come back, and I'm just using the same grit sandpaper that we finished the body with, which is 320. And for the edges we just use a sanding pad. Now I've taken that outside and I've just blown all the dust off there. I've gone all around it and I've checked it, and there are no blemishes. We are ready to proceed. Now, because I'm using mahogany, I need to grain fill before we apply the stain. If you're using an open pored wood like mahogany or ash, you have very large pores. Now, if you apply the finish directly over those, they will suck in the finish and you will be left with these little craters, these little divots all over the guitar body. And some people like that look, but I prefer to get a nice smooth finish. So the first step on an open grain wood is to actually fill all of that open grain with a wood filler. I use a water-based wood filler. It allows me to thin it down with a little bit of water, get it to a very thin consistency, and then I just wipe it all over the body and it sits down into the pores nicely. Now you can also get many different colours. We've got a reddy brown, I've got a black filler, and we've got a white filler. There are many colours that you can purchase, and generally you buy them based on the wood you're using, and the filler is designed to blend in as close as possible to the colour of the timber. Now in the case of this body, I'm going to use a dark red filler. I actually am not trying to hide the grain. Once we apply our finish, I want to be able to see all of the grain, the nice dark little specks where that filler is sitting down inside the pores. It just adds a nice visual effect overall. So we just take our filler, need an old bowl, and we're just going to scoop some of this filler in there. Now we want to just pour a little bit of water in there. Not too much to begin with, and we just want to start breaking this down. Now I switched to a smaller spoon because it allows me to get in and just break up some of those lumps. Now that's looking pretty good now. That's about the consistency you're after, like a thick soup. Now we simply just pour a bit of this on the body, and we'll just work in sections at a time. Now I'm just using a little brush and I'm brushing it across the grain. The idea being that we force the filler into the pores. If I was to wipe in that direction, we would actually pull the filler out of the pores. Now I want to avoid getting it into the holes here for the ferrules, so we shall work very carefully around that area. We'll come back to that area. In fact, we'll just skirt around it and then come back and fill that in later. Just keep moving some of this filler around. We don't need all this filler down here. We can move it up here. Now the beauty of this stuff is that it sands very easily. And of course, once we've coated the entire body like this, we're going to need to sand pretty much all of it off and just leave a little bit left in the pores. Alright, we can just slowly work this section now. Now the brush is relatively dry and I can just work in between those holes. If you do it gently, you will not pile all of the filler inside those holes. So we're just going to work in sections. I've just done the back of the guitar. We're going to give that about half an hour and let that completely dry, and then I'm going to do the sides, let that dry, and then I'm going to flip it totally over and we're going to do the front of the guitar. So our grain filler is completely dry. We're going to block sand it. I'm using the same grit that I sanded the body to, which is 320. And we're just going to work little sections at a time. And we're just going to sand back to bare wood. But we're going to leave the filler in the grain. So this is what we're trying to achieve. We've block sanded this area here. I can see bare wood again, but all of our filler is still sitting in the open pores. We want to move across the body in sections and just repeat the process and just get this uniform look over the entire face of the guitar. So we've got a little bit of build-up of filler in the holes on the back of the guitar. Just take a drill bit that is size smaller than the hole. Take a bit of sandpaper, just wrap it around, and we can get into each of those holes. I don't mind a little bit of build-up in there, but there's too much in there at the moment. A little bit of build-up will help for a tight fit when we push the ferrules in. That's fine, but I don't want too much in there that actually obstructs me being able to push it in. So I'm happy that that is nice and sanded. I've checked everywhere. We've got all of the filler that was sitting on the body sanded away, and we only have the filler left in the grain now. Now you don't have to apply the filler the same way as I did. I just find when I'm using a water-based filler and I apply it with a brush and then I sand it back to bare wood, I only need to apply the filler once. I'm not coming back for a second coat. It fills the pores really well doing it that way. So I've just found that that technique that I use there works best for me. If you're using an oil-based filler, well, I suggest you follow the instructions that came with the filler. Now I'm going to be using my concentrated liquid stains again, and this time we're going to mix some red mahogany with some cherry red into some lacquer thinner. You could dissolve it in water as well, and I'm going to wipe 1 or 2 coats onto the body until I achieve the colour depth that I'm after. So it's best to wipe some of these stains onto some mahogany before you go ahead and actually wipe it onto the body. And we've got red mahogany here by itself, we've got cherry red by itself, and then this piece is a mixture of both of those together. This is the colour that we are going to use on the body. So we've got 1 fluid ounce of lacquer thinner there. You could be dissolving it in water as well, or methylated spirits. So we're going to put a couple of coats of this stain on just to darken this body to the colour that I'm after. This is just the first coat. So now we've got the colour on the body, we need to rub a finish in. And before we do that, I wanted to point out our darker grain fill that we used is very obvious in the wood. You can see just the little dark specks all over the body where it highlights all of the grain, and it's a really nice look. So to enable us to hold this guitar up so we can wipe a finish on it, I just use a couple of L brackets, and I've just ground the ends off, drilled a couple of holes, and they actually just slot in like that. Couple of screws into there, and then we can hold the body up, we can hold it up in a vise, and we can get around it and wipe the finish on the guitar without having to move it around. So we're going to hand rub a finish onto this guitar body, and there are a few different ways we can do that. We've got a Danish oil here, we've got True Oil, and we've got a wipe on poly. And all 3 of them will give us a very similar finish by the time we finish wiping this stuff on. Now I could go with True Oil like we used on the neck, but I think I'm going to use a Danish oil this time. So we'll pour a bit of that into a container and we'll get ready to apply it. First thing I'm going to do is just use a tack cloth to just wipe the body over. pick up any dust or anything that may still be on there so it doesn't get wiped onto the body. So I've got my little applicator and we've just poured a little bit of the Danish oil into a container. Just going to pour a little bit on the body. I'm just going to work a very thin coat all over the top of the guitar. Now it's going to look a little uneven for a while until we build a few coats up. It's just going to get sucked into the wood initially and it's going to look dull and flat after we've got our first few coats on, but that will start to change when we build a little bit up. So that's looking pretty good. We can put this up in the vise now and get at the rest of the body. So again, we're just wiping a very thin coat on and we can look at the sides now. Just work our way all around the body. Make sure you get into every little spot and give it a coat of Danish oil. So that's our first coat done. We can come back later and put some more on when that's dry. So we've let that dry overnight and I've just got my tack cloth and I just want to pick up any dust that might have settled on the body overnight. And now we just repeat the process. Just take a small amount and just start wiping it all over the body. Now that first coat did soak into the body and we had a pretty patchy looking finish, but that will start to change as we apply more coats of finish. We've got 4 coats of Danish oil on the body now and it's starting to get a little bit of a shine on there. I'm going to knock that back with some superfine steel wool and then we can apply another 4 coats of Danish oil. So we just want to take that shine off and just get it back to a dull finish. We're just taking out those inconsistencies in the finish that we have at the moment and we're preparing the surface for another round of Danish oil. So the body's been rubbed back and we have a dull surface all over. I've taken it outside, I just used a bit of compressed air and we've just blown all of the particles off the guitar that I could see. I'm still going to use my tack cloth though and just give it a good wipe over. Now I use this tack cloth every coat before I apply it. I rub it all over the guitar, pick up anything that is still on there. So this guitar is going to get another 4 coats of Danish oil. That'll give us a total of 8 coats on there. And then I'm just going to rub it back with some steel wool as we've just done. So there is now another 4 coats rubbed onto the body and that gives us a total of 8 coats. And you can see we've started to get a shine now. And you can see that gloss starting to disappear as we slowly work the finish with the steel wool. And I doubt you could find an easier finish to do on a guitar than this finish. So we've just got our old t-shirt here and we're now just buffing the body the same way that we buff the neck. We're just working every section of the guitar body here. Generate a bit of friction there, and you will slowly start to build a nice even shine. Now, it's not going to be a full gloss finish, but it's certainly a nice satin finish. Now, I just wanted to quickly show you one of the repairs we did. You might remember in one of the earlier videos we had some tear out on the side of the guitar body caused by the router, and we had filled that in with some super glue and some mahogany dust. It's actually just there. You can just make it out. So the repair that we did is almost invisible once you wipe a little bit of stain and finish onto the body. Alright, so this is all buffed out now, and that took about 20-25 minutes. That's a little bit of hard work getting that all buffed up to a nice sheen, but you can see the effort is well worthwhile. It's a lovely looking natural finish. So this was just all applied by hand. We wiped everything on, including the stain, and we just buffed it out with an old t-shirt. So you don't need any of the fancy spray gear to achieve a nice guitar finish.